Hey everyone, this is Jeremy with Teletone. We have a really exciting announcement today. If this is your first time here, we are a company that's been making virtual instruments since 2020, but today we are releasing our very first audio effects plugin called the ToneArchitect. So what is the ToneArchitect? It is a tone shaping plugin with the emphasis on the word tone. Our goal, first and foremost, is to bring a bit of fun back into mixing, but also listen to things musically rather than acting predictably. And over the past 4 years, I always had a lot of fun making the demos for our products. And I think maybe the number 2 question that we would get asked on Instagram really consistently was, how are you making the sounds for your instruments and how are you getting the sounds in your mixes for the demos? And there were just a series of things that I would lean on, when I was making music that have really come in handy. These things are kind of foundational to the way that I create sounds and the way that I do it. Not necessarily the right or wrong way, just the way that I do it. And a lot of you seem to really respond to that. So we're going to dive in, but before we do that, you probably want to hear some sounds. So I've loaded up the trailer music for the ToneArchitect, and I've done one bounce where all of the instances are active and another instance where everything is bypassed. It'll become, I think, fairly obvious what the ToneArchitect is doing when we kind of A/B the two. All right, ToneArchitect trailer music. We'll start with everything on. So as you can hear, there's a lot of the guitar tone that is coming from the ToneArchitect. It was used on every instrument. I don't believe I used any other plugins except for reverbs and delays. So nothing tonal is coming from any other plugins on that demonstration. Okay, so here's the plugin. There are 3 different sections: the Saturator, Tone Shaper, and Compressor. These can each be bypassed by clicking on their label. And we're just going to go through these quickly from left to right. The Saturator has 3 different types of saturation: tape, tube, and cassette. Here's your saturation dial. Pre and post gain, you can link them where these knobs work together. The Tone Shaper section, this is where you are going to shape the tone. High pass filter, low pass filter is a band compress. We'll get into this in a second. And then last is the compressor for the whole unit, which you can see has a mix button, auto gain, etc. There's also an input and output right here. Not to be overlooked is the oversample button up here. This goes to 4x oversampling. That'll come in handy for any of you that are using this on mix bus or for mastering. The preset browser is right here, and we'll get into that a little bit later. But let's go ahead and dive into these sections one at a time. I'm going to break with tradition here, and I'm going to go through this whole thing and try not to ever use the word warm. Let's see if I can do it. Okay, starting with the saturator, first we have tape saturation. This is a symmetric distortion that introduces odd harmonics only. This tape setting is probably the one that I would say is maybe the most practical. Generally speaking, you're not going to hear it break up a whole lot until you get into the upper ranges. So this is very useful. And I don't want to give too much of a demonstration of each one of these things, because when we get into the preset menu, I want you to hear these in more context and more of a musical setting. So I do have this very generic sounding drum bounce that we can just listen to real quickly, but we're going to go into, when we do the presets, you'll get a much better an idea of how these things all work together. So let's just hear a little bit of drums with the tape. you want to break it up more, push this pre-gain. So that is the tape saturation, emulating 2-inch analog tape. We actually worked with an electrical engineer on this plugin, which really came in handy when we were working on the tube section of the Saturator, because we were trying to mimic the actual sound of an analog distortion circuit. The circuit that we were mimicking was comprised of 12AX7s and 628As with an output transformer on the end. And so what that means for you is that it really sounds like the audio is passing through an analog distortion circuit rather than a saturation effect being applied to it. So it sounds like the unit is heating up, and there is a little bit of a volume increase that comes with that. So that is the tube setting. The tube setting uses odd and even harmonics, by the way. So the cassette saturation, as you might guess, is emulating the saturation noise caused by like an old cassette player, kind of like this Tascam Portastudio. This is something we've used a lot in our instruments. We process samples through it. So we were trying to emulate the sound of one of these as you start to drive it. It's using what's called a nonlinear recursive filter to kind of emphasize, there's this 900 hertz range that is kind of emphasized a little bit in certain types of old tape, and that is present in this cassette setting. One little side note before we move on is that this pre-gain knob here is feeding the saturation, and the input is for the whole instrument. So if you're not using the saturation, you may want to adjust the input here. And when you're using the saturation, use this pre-gain knob to kind of determine how much of the amount of saturation or how much gain you want to feed the saturator. Okay, that brings us to the tone shaper section. This is the heart and soul of the ToneArchitect. And when I said in the intro that we are introducing kind of some surprises in the plugin, this is what I was mainly referring to. And if you've been working in music for a while like I have, you tend to start to fall into the same patterns and routines. And you, more than you probably even realize, or at least with me personally, you've started to build in assumptions about what frequency ranges sound like on certain instruments. And you kind of, before even thinking about it, reach for certain frequencies to boost or dip without listening. Okay, so what is the tone shaper and what does it do? Well, I've leaned really heavily on a couple of pieces of equipment over the years for Teletone instruments. This TubeTech SMC2B and then their Pultec style EQs. And so we've kind of combined these two ideas of a multi-band compressor and a Pultec style EQ into one unit, which we internally jokingly called the Multec. When we think about a Pultec style EQ, we think about almost this horizontal motion in a curve. You're able to boost and attenuate. And if you have your frequency set to 60 hertz, you're boosting, and then most people are using the attenuation also. So you're getting a boost and then a dip higher in the frequency range. And you use those two to dial that in. And the result is this real tight, punchy low end. You can do the same with the high end. And so that's like this horizontal curve that you can think of. A multi-band compressor, we tend to think of more of a vertical motion, that you have these frequency bands or ranges, and those are being compressed, and you can also boost the ranges as you are compressing them. So combining those into one, we have the horizontal curve of a Pultec style EQ, and then the vertical motion of a multi-band, where you're able to boost a frequency range and then also compress it. But we've simplified things even a little bit more in that with these three knobs, the lows, mids, and highs, you are boosting and attenuating at the same time, regardless of which way you're going. And let me explain that. The lows and highs have a crossover slider underneath here. And these bands are split in half. And the crossover point is that dividing line. So when your crossover is set to around 150, and you turn the knob counterclockwise on the lows, you're going to get a boost in a frequency range below 150 hertz. And then you're going to get a little bit of a scoop above. And then the inverse is true. When you go clockwise, what's going to happen is you're going to get a little bit of a boost in the range above 150 and then a little bit of a scoop or a dip below. And then the same applies to the highs. If you have this set to 6K and you turn it this way, you're going to be boosting a range above it and scooping below. When you go this way, you're going to be boosting a range below it, and then it's going to create a dip above it. The mid-range operates a little bit differently in that there is no crossover point for that, but it is determined by the other two crossover points. So whatever is in between these is what the mids are going to be. So in this case, above 250 and below 2K, that's going to be your mid-range. And you take that entire range and you can boost or cut it. So after you've decided which way you want to boost, you can also use this band compress to take whatever range you boosted and kind of smack it back down if you want to. So we have this boost and attenuate vertically and horizontally. And you may be thinking, okay, well, if I set this crossover point on the lows to something a lot lower, like 60 hertz, and I'm going this way, I would love to get some of that, 50 to 60, but I don't necessarily want 10 hertz or 20 hertz being also boosted. Well, we place these high pass and low pass filters afterwards in the circuit. So if you want to filter some of that out, you can. This is a 12 decibel slope, so it's pretty steep. So it'll do a good job of filtering out whatever you don't want there. So when you're using this, when you have it set to 150, what frequency exactly are you boosting when you turn it this way? What are you attenuating? We would like for you to ask yourself a different question, and that is, what sounds the best? But let's go ahead and mess with this for just a second. I'm going to loop these drums again. So this band compressed threshold can go all the way to negative 60 dB, and the range is minus 10 dB. So that is the tone shaper section. We are really excited about it. We hope that you can turn off your eyes and use your ears and have a little bit of fun with this. Next is the compressor section, and this is an RMS-based 4-stage VCA compressor. It's kind of like in the style of the API 2500. It's fast, clean, transparent, and for a plugin called the ToneArchitect, you might wonder why we didn't do a compressor that was super colored. There is so much tone happening before it. We thought that by the time you get to the last stage of the compressor, you may not want to be adding any more tones, so this is a fairly transparent compressor. This compress style uses a medium soft knee. You can see that the attack ranges go from 30 milliseconds all the way down to 30 microseconds. What is a microsecond? It's a really fast millisecond, basically. And then the release settings, we go from 50 milliseconds all the way up to 3 seconds. These are, once again, kind of similar to the API 2500 settings. Ratio goes from 2 to 1 all the way to 10 to 1. There is a mix dial to mix your wet-dry signal. The auto gain is a static gain that is calculated by basically looking at the threshold and ratio settings and making sure that you don't lose a bunch of volume as you're compressing it, essentially in a nutshell. Let's hear the compressor a little bit. Okay, now let's start messing with the ToneArchitect as a whole. By the way, if at any point you want to just initialize all the settings back to their default, go into the preset menu and just click on this initialize button right here. Okay, so I'd like to get into the presets now, but I just want to say one thing real quick before we start that. And that is, we've kind of just done the YouTube walkthrough thing where we do the drums all crunchy with a super fast attack and fast release with the saturation turned up. And even though that's kind of like the go-to move in this type of video, I think that is because people want to hear the extremes of the instrument to see how far you can push it. But that's not necessarily practical to what you are wanting to do with your music. But for a video like this, it doesn't always make a lot of sense to say, let's explore the most subtle nuances of this type plugin when you might be listening on your phone or a laptop, which I hope you're not. So with the presets, we are going to get a little bit more into the nuance and the musicality of the ToneArchitect. And I hope you're listening on high quality speakers or headphones. That would be really helpful, because otherwise a lot of the nuance will be lost. And so I just wanted to say that before we start. There are over 150 presets in the ToneArchitect, and you can access them right here. There's a bunch of different folders you can browse through. So we'll start with kind of a basic one. This is Drum Bus Exciter. Let's pull up something that's kind of the opposite. This is kind of hyping the lows and the highs with a bit of saturation. Let's do Analog Edge. And you can see these knobs are turned the other way because we're actually dipping some of the lower and higher frequencies. I got some saturation, band compress, and a little bit of compressor on the end here. Drum Bus Silk. I really like this one. This one has a very silky smooth top end to it. And we'll take that idea just a little bit further with this preset called Vinyl. Okay, well, we've heard a lot of drums today, so let's move on. I know a lot of you are probably getting some of your sounds from Splice, which is fine, but a lot of those samples are coming to you kind of very hyped up in the lows and highs, and sometimes they're already pre-compressed and limited. But I went ahead and imported some strings from Splice And I just want to do a quick demonstration here. First, let's go ahead and bypass it. I'm going to show you what I mean. And this one isn't too bad. Sometimes you get the cello where like 60 hertz is just really accentuated. But for a mix, this is probably still too much on the lows and highs. And you may just want something that sounds a little bit cooler. No offense to whoever made this. It's a great loop. Let's listen to this preset, Strings, Tame Highs and Lows. So this is going to help it to sit in the mix just a little bit better. When I bypass the plugin, you can hear all that low end information that's going to be competing with the bass in like the 60 to 80 range. That is really coming up when we bypass it. So this high pass filter is doing a lot of nice work there. Then we'll just do one more. This other one has a similar issue, to me at least, with the cellos. And so again, that's fine, but it feels like you're hearing the rosin on the bow a little bit too much. So I have this preset pulled up called Strings Vintage Ribbon, and I'm trying to go for that, well, what it sounds like, that vintage ribbon mic sound. So you get the idea there. Once again, in case you're new here, a little bit of background on me. I was a classical piano performance major in college, and that has a lot of influence over what we do here, especially in regards to anything related to piano. So I have this Keyscape piano pulled up, and it's a great sounding piano, but it's just very, very clean. It's kind of the epitome of high fidelity piano recordings. It kind of has that sound like your head is underneath the lid of the piano and you're listening to the hammers hit the strings. But we wanted to talk about things in the context of musicality. And so my favorite piano recordings are like the recordings of Sviatoslav Richter from the 70s and 60s in Russia, Martha Argerich in the 1965 piano competition. I love those recordings. And those are room mics. They're not under the lid of the piano. And so, of course, you can use reverb, but you have to use a lot of reverb to get rid of that hammer sound. And so we want to try to replicate the sound of those older recordings through using other means besides just reverb. Now, I have added a reverb to this. I'm going to let you hear this as is first, including with the reverb. And so here's a little bit of, this piece is by Maurice Ravel, and it's called Un vague solution. And I literally, pardon my French, I'm so bad at French, but if you speak French, you would still need a translator to understand what I just said, which is a boat on the ocean. The music is supposed to be very, very flowing. We're not supposed to be hearing all the individual movements. So let's listen to it with a little bit of reverb as is. Let's turn this on. You hear all those lows jump right back in when we bypass it. So you can see I'm doing quite a lot with the filters because these things are not disconnected. Hearing all the low end and those hammers hitting and everything and the ultra high end frequencies, what that does to your ears makes you think you're very, very close to the sound. You are intimately close, which is good sometimes, but in this context, it's not what we want. So we filtered out some of that and tried to just create a little bit of distance from the source by using these filters. Now, all of these are just a starting place. We, of course, could take this further by boosting the saturation, making it sound a little bit older, and then messing with these, which we'll do just for a minute here. So you get the idea. It's a beautiful piece of music. And one kind of funny thing about this is, although we're talking about classical music recordings from the 60s and 70s and that vinyl sound of the recital hall, there is quite a bit of overlap between that and the piano sounds you would want for like hip hop recordings, because those are also sampling vinyl from those decades. So even though we're talking in classical music terms, this could also very much apply to hip hop music. All right, let's hear just a little bit more piano, but a little bit different context. I made this little chord progression to try to be kind of in the style of like, I don't know, 70s folk pop type sounds. We'll start with the preset I was already on, then we're going to switch it. So that's kind of, like I said, these are all starting places, so you're going to want to tweak from where you load it. Let's hear 1964 Grand real quick. I'm going to remove a little bit of this at the front here. This one boosts a little bit of the low mid frequencies. It looks like probably in the 150 to 200 range. We have some filtering happening too, but this is a nice balanced sound. And of course we do have some brighter, more full presets too. Here's Brilliant Grand, in case you have something that sounds a little more lo-fi that you want to fill out a bit more. Move away from the keyscape piano and look into something that everyone has probably dealt with at one point or another, and that is a felt piano. They sound great. They are hard to work with. There's a lot of muddy low mids in most of the pianos that I've had. Let's listen to a little bit of this Chopin etude with the ToneArchitect bypassed to begin with. All right, let's unbypass it. There are two bypasses on here. I've been kind of using different ones at different times. I apologize for that. I will try to stick to using this one, but I'm probably going to forget to. So this is piano, felt piano cleanup. There are two different felt piano ones. There's subtle and more extreme. Here's the subtle one. So that cleans it up a little bit. There is a more extreme one, and when we really start to try to clean this up and get a little bit more out of the top end, then the noise from the samples, you start to hear that a little bit more. So that is just something that's in the samples. Not a lot we can do about it, but in the mix, you probably wouldn't hear it so much. So that is piano, felt piano cleanup extreme. Okay, let's get into the acoustic guitar just a little bit here. And I was thinking of all of you when I made this. I recorded it with one microphone around the 12th fret of the acoustic guitar in an untreated room. That might be closer to like kind of the median of what the people watching this video have access to. And so I'm not the greatest guitar player, but just record this little progression here. Just bypassed. So there's a really big tonal shift in this. It's almost like the EQ goes from this to this. And I think that, once again, I'm always referencing recordings from the 60s and 70s, and I just think it has a really great tone to it. Let's hear another one. If your guitar is a little bit weak and you want to feel it out, here's one that could help with that. A little bit more boomy. Old strings, I love this one. Here's one that breaks up just a little bit. Okay, we should move on. Okay, we kind of went through this earlier, but I just want to show you a few of the guitar tracks here. I recorded my Tele literally directly into a preamp for these. So here's direct. Mid-forward tube drive is what I'm using here, and it is very mid-forward. I push the mids as high as they will go here. Let's hear this other guitar. Here's root guitar. Using the same preset, although I think I altered it a little bit. There's a little slap back delay on here too. This bass is not a mistake. I sent that also direct through my Shadow Hills preamp, but I just cranked it till it clipped. It has kind of a cool sound. Let's go ahead and pull that one up. This is using low frequency tube drive. All right, in this mid section, we have two more guitars. Let's hear them with and without. Here, most of that low end is filtered out of those. Then it comes back in, essentially the same. There's an ending where I think there's another lead that's maybe a little more driven. This is going to get embarrassing. You're going to hear what you don't normally hear in this track, which is some messy playing. I'm not much of a guitarist. So let's just solo this root guitar for a second. And we'll just cruise through a few more presets because it seemed like I used a lot of the same one on this one. Kind of like almost like a David Axelrod sounding lead here. So I don't play a lot of electric guitar, but we kind of fell into this on accident, that this plugin is really fun and great on electric guitar, even if you're going straight in. Okay, I guess the last project that I want to pull up is this song that I wrote with a friend of mine probably like 5 or 6 years ago. We were trying to work on TV film sync stuff, and they wanted some kind of 80s pop thing. But I really like this song. We never ended up, I don't think it ever got released, but I really like this song, and I went ahead and just reopened it. I hadn't looked at this in forever. And I basically deleted all the other plugins that I was using and replaced them with the ToneArchitect outside of chorus, reverb, and delay. I don't think there's really much of anything else in here. And I'll just kind of let you hear a little bit of this song, and then I'll show you in context what I did on the mix bus and then on some of the individual instruments. So it gives you an idea of the flavor. So right off the bat, let's go over to the mix bus and let's just hear this preset. This is one of the bus presets, Low End Punch. And let's hear the chorus with and without this. A cassette actually for the saturation. Let's turn it up a little bit and hear if we can make this sound a little more cassette-like. Let's dive into some of the individual tracks here. And actually, before I get too far, I think the main thing I wanted to listen in here was the vocals. And we were kind of doing this a very Nashville way where speakers were on in the room, I believe. It was a very live performance, which gets a better take. But what inevitably ends up happening is that there are some tonal things that happen that are unfortunate. And so you kind of have to remedy those. And I believe I'm using the multi-band compressor. There were some frequencies that were kind of really jumping out, and this helped to tame those. So let's hear a verse, I guess.
This takes me back to that place when I was so young, so safe.
So let's hear that again. Now there's a group vocal effect here, and then I have treated them individually on their individual channels too, because I want a little bit of something different for the verse compared to the chorus. So
this takes me back to.
So this has no EQ on it, nothing. ToneArchitect is bypassed. There is a chorus, a plate reverb, and then a stereo delay.
This takes me back to that place.
Let's turn them on.
When I was so young, so safe, taking for granted all of our chances, always moving slow.
Turn these back off.
House to house, we moved after nightfall. How I wish I knew.
Now the chorus. Let's turn these off. So I think the presets I'm using on this, let's see, for the group bus, I'm using lead female preset. And then, let me see about these doubles. I don't remember, I did this kind of quickly. BGB group 2, okay, that makes sense. So this is basically like carving out all that low end information and also the super highs, because we don't want those consonants jumping out from behind the lead. So sometimes you want to tame those a little bit, but we do want them to be a little bit sparkly too. So let's go to this other verse.
You take me back to that place.
Turn it off.
Broke cars and freedom in your face.
Hear what I'm talking about? It's like there's something in like the 250 to 400 range that keeps on really jumping out, and that multiband is helping to remedy that. Okay, we won't get too deep into this, but I want to show you. This is not so much of a preset thing, but more of a tone shaper section and filters thing. I want to show you how I'm trying to get some of these synth parts to sit in the mix the way that I want them to. So let's go to a part where this bouncy lead is happening. See how we're just brightening it up and then carving out all the low end to make sure it sits where we want it to. There's some other pads going on. You got to be real careful when you're layering all these different synth parts to make sure that they all have their own space. So we're pushing a little bit of the sub information and then carving out a little bit of the low mids here. So we're going to get some of that bite from the top end and the subby low end. Bus back on. Anyway, I checked right before I started this video, and apparently we never did release this song. So if you're wondering, I guess this is the place you can listen to it. Okay, I think that's going to do it for our first walkthrough of our first standalone audio plugin. We had a lot of fun making this. We are having a lot of fun using it, but we want to hear how you use it and what you are doing with it. So make sure to tag us on Instagram as you're using this. It's at Teletone Audio. You can purchase the ToneArchitect at our website, teletoneaudio.com. Thank you so much for watching. We are really excited to hear what you do with it.
Take